Again. All right. Hi, this is Paul. And well, tell me a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Guy. I'm from Israel. I have a bachelor's degree in cognitive science. I got into cognitive science because I'm fascinated by how worldview affects perception, which is actually a topic that has recently been very, very relevant in this little corner, which I highly appreciate. And from there, I got to also predictive processing, Vervaeke, Peterson, Peugeot, and all that good stuff. And so I'm 28 now, and the reason actually we're having this conversation, I reached out to you, is because since I was 13, so 15 years ago, I have been both watching and doing professional wrestling. Because around a month or two ago, you did a video talking about kayfabe.
Yep.
And that, so I watched that, and then Peterson and Pajot had a conversation about narrative, and I was actually on a tour, not tour, but I was in Ireland wrestling, and sort of it was like a big thing for me, like the biggest organization I participated for, and listening to that conversation sort of brought a lot of, like, it resonated a lot with how I view wrestling, and sort of made a few things click. And I thought that maybe you'd be interested in talking about it based on the video you did back then. So today I was sort of putting together my thoughts and perspectives and sort of the things that I want to talk about.
Okay. Well, let's start with were you born in Israel?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Native. I'm born and raised. If I sound American, I get it a lot. I'm not. I've never actually been to the United States. I don't have
Wow.
family. Yeah.
Yeah, if I just met you on the street with your accent, I wouldn't think a thing of it.
Yeah, I get that a lot. I mean, so I work with languages. I'm actually a Hebrew tutor, and if yeah, we might actually. So I'm launching a course now. If you're interested, the viewer is interested in learning modern Hebrew. I'm actually just right in the process now of launching a course. So depending on when this gets uploaded, it might have already launched. So either that, or there will be a link in the description. If it hasn't launched, you can sign up to get notified when it does.
Okay.
If you happen to be interested.
Well, tell me about
Yeah.
your household of origin. Was your family religious? What was it? What was it like growing up
No,
where you did? Oh, okay.
no, not at all. I myself also have a I'm not religious. I'm a secular Jew. So
Okay.
as you know, in Judaism, it's more of a spectrum thing as opposed to a binary. I'm
Yeah,
religious
you
or
guys
not.
you guys have one word for, you've got one word for two things, and it confuses a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't put it that way, because in a sense there is, okay, maybe, because Judaism is both a religion and a culture, but they're
Right.
very intertwined in many ways. But also there are some definite uh, points where they're distinct, and nowadays actually there's a lot of, without getting into the current
Right. So but it
political
was a
moment.
secular
Yeah.
household.
Yeah.
You went
Secular household.
what was your schooling like?
um Regular, you know, state school. Nothing too, I don't know, interesting there.
Okay.
I would say it's
Okay.
just secular kid from a secular household.
How'd you get into wrestling?
So and I still am. I was a nerdy kid. Now I'm a nerdy adult. Um,
that's that's usually what
by
happens.
the way, excuse my clearing my throat, as I'm probably going to be doing that a lot. I don't know why. I just woke up like this today.
Okay.
So please bear with me. So I was a nerdy kid, and there was a fad when I was around 13, when I was 2012 where suddenly everyone got into wrestling.
Hmm.
And in an effort to sort of fit in, I tried getting into it as well. And as soon as everyone else got into it, it died off, and they didn't like it anymore. But I was enthralled by it. And for many years I couldn't quite explain why. And it's actually only probably this year or last year where I sort of got enough to really fully, I think, now understand exactly what it is that I like about wrestling. I think the way I describe it might be interesting to a lot of the viewers based on the things that I know that this little corner deals with. Yeah, anything else before?
Well, I'm just so then you got into it. I mean, was this something that how often was there a club, or was it a class in
Okay.
school, or was it a hobby? How did that work for you?
Okay, so when I got into it, there actually wasn't anywhere in Israel to learn it. And soon after I got into it, actually, there used to be a school, and then the school started back up. But there's all of one place in Israel to do wrestling. There has
Okay.
been for a while. Um,
Now, when we're talking wrestling, I mean, there's in America,
okay.
there's a lot of high school programs that do wrestling, and
No, yeah, it's pro wrestling, professional wrestling, the theatrical kind of wrestling. That's what we'll be talking about. We don't
okay,
have high school wrestling or stuff like that in Israel. I do jiu-jitsu, but that's completely beside
okay,
the
okay.
separate thing. So I'm talking
Well,
about professional wrestling.
so what is that like as a kid? Because again, I mean, again, wrestling is a high school sport in America. It's not every high school has it, but it's not that uncommon. And so, I had kids growing up that I met kids in college who had wrestled in high school and some of that stuff, but that's a very different thing. So what is like theatrical wrestling as a teenager like? I mean, I'm not quite sure how to frame that in terms of my experience of, kids play soccer, kids play basketball, kids learn music.
Yeah, so that, I mean, in that sense, it's no different in Israel. It's not that we have a culture where that makes sense. It didn't make sense for anyone around me either here.
Yeah.
I would just go once a week because that's how often classes were to Tel Aviv. I live in Jerusalem. To a small, like dingy place where they had the ring, and I would train there. Uh, every few months we'd have a show, and
Huh.
I did that so from the beginning of middle school through high school. Then I took a 2-year break when I was in the army.
So what's
Uh,
the show like? Do people come there and pay to watch the show, or is it parents
so
that
that's
come? And
so that's something we'll talk about, what kind of show wrestling is and who goes there. I mean, the who is not really it's a whole. There isn't a set crowd that you can have very varied people there, but or I guess we'll get into the why
yeah.
later. Um, so essentially, so first of all, maybe it is a good time to get into it a bit. So what pro wrestling is a form of athletic theater, um, where the actors play athletes um, that are competing in a combat sport, so like boxing or MMA. That sport is called pro wrestling. It's actually nothing like what you think of when you think of wrestling. It's more akin to MMA nowadays. That's sort of how it evolved. Um, and the each actor sort of plays a character for many years. So it's the same character for the most part. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, I play a character. And when I play that character sort of in real time. So it ages with me for many, many years. And that character evolves and changes and a bunch of stuff happens to it. But essentially what I do is I do mock fights or mock competitions in wrestling. that are predetermined in the sense that we try not to hurt each other, and also we know the outcome going into the match. So it's more theater than competition. And so, okay, so
Well, now you've really got me interested now. So, how does this start for you in terms of your character? Do you start by playing different characters and then one sort of evolves? Is there a director that sort of, because I did theater in high school.
I also did
No
theater in high
wrestling
school.
was involved, but there
Yeah.
was a play, there was a stage, and the character was only in the confines of the play. So,
So I think it might be best to sort of get to it from what I
yeah, keep going.
had. Yeah. No, no, I'll just go with where the conversation leads. So what we have is, first of all, sometimes it takes people a while to find their character. And you sort of, based on the crowd reactions, which is a big thing in wrestling that we'll get to. When you found your character when it clicks. And wrestling as an art form is unique in that the audience really participates in the performance. They're an active part of the performance. They're there's a way that the crowd is supposed to act. So a wrestling match has it's kind of hard because there's I was wondering where to start with because everything is interrelated.
Yes. I get it. Keep going. It's great. This is riveting. I'm totally fascinated by this.
Okay, so I'll oddly start with talking about fairy tales because and this sort of was what, but there's a specific sentence that Jonathan Pajot said to Peterson in their latest conversation about stories that really was the thing that made me decide to contact you, which is that all classic stories and all fairy tales have the narrative is you have the hero's journey, but a more basic distillation of it is stable, down, and then up. And Peterson put it in psychological terms as steady state, collapse, and reintegration taken from Piaget. And for wrestling, a wrestling match actually follows a very predictable, in a sense, structure that developed. So wrestling has only existed for less than 150 years. So it's a very new art form in that sense. And it sort of sprung bottom up based on what worked, what drew audiences, and what made audiences react. And it's interesting that they sort of settled on the same kind of match narrative. So each match has the classic matches. Nowadays we have other stuff, but classically a match is a good guy, a bad guy, and a referee. So the good guy is called a babyface. The bad guy is called a heel because babyface is got shortened to face, and then heel is the opposite of face in the body, which is a funny little naming scheme. So you have the good guy, the bad guy, and the judge, essentially. And from there, you tell a very primal and a very primal narrative that resonates a lot. So a match starts with a shine. What's called a shine. It's essentially the exposition why you should like the babyface. It's introduction to the characters. The babyface takes the lead, and it sort of shows you that in a fair fight, the babyface would win or should win. And this is what would be the act one of a play or of a story, or that would be the stable. This is the starting off point. Then we have the cutoff. The cutoff is the heel, the bad guy takes control, usually by underhanded means, behind the referee's back, the referee doesn't see something. And that's the turning point. That's the start of the downturn. Then you have the heat, which is the main part of the match, and that's act two of any other story, and that's where the bad guy's in control. And if we're talking about in terms of narrative, that's when the hero is in jeopardy. The hero has the struggle or the challenge that they have to deal with. And in that heat, the portion of the match where the bad guy is in control, the face gets what's called hope spots, which are little moments where the audience thinks, oh, maybe now he's going to get the momentum back. Now he's going to overcome the challenge. But they're fleeting, and eventually the heel takes back control. So this is Act 2, and then you have the comeback. The comeback is the face manages to do something, gets the bad guy to falter, gets the upper hand, gets momentum going, and gets back in control. And this would be like the second turning point plus Act 3 of the play. Now, so that you have the whole narrative there of stability, disintegration, and reintegration, but the match isn't over. Because then you have the finish, because there is the narrative of the match, and then you have the finish. The finish can be either the good guy or the bad guy wins. So you have the specific narrative of the match, but then you still have the meta narrative or the larger narrative in which the specific narrative is embedded. So you have the characters. How did the heel get here? How did the face get here? How does this relate to the larger part of their journey as a character? Sometimes you have the MacGuffin, which is the championship title. That's the thing that you strive for. That's the mythological or the archetypal gold in many narratives. That's the thing that you want to get. And so you have the specific narrative within a larger meta narrative that the characters go through. And if you follow a character for years, you can see the character evolve and change over time. Okay, so that's the structure of a match, right? And then the fans participate in that they're supposed to, their role is to cheer on the babyface and boo the heel. And matches usually are not, scripted. You don't know exactly what you're going to do when you go out there. You know the structure that you're going to follow, because that's a classic structure and you always follow it. Some fans know it, some fans don't. It usually doesn't matter. In the same way it doesn't matter when you watch a movie. You sort of know you have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, even if not consciously. But once you go out there and you have some specific spots you have planned. So spots are sequences of moves, specific ones that you decided ahead of time, and maybe you have the story of the match that you want to tell. For example, I recently had a match where my babyface character is a stereotypical nerd, which is, we'll get to how characters are formed in wrestling, and why I picked that one. And in the match I had in Ireland, I was for an organization called OTT, Over the Top Wrestling. Just if anyone wants to find it. The match was, I was essentially facing a bad guy who was just bullying me around, and I was not able to get the upper hand for most of the match. And we told that specific, again, it's a relatively basic narrative, but we told it live through the performance, through improvisation, interaction with each other, and with the crowd. So often what happens is that at one point in the match, the good guy would be in peril, like in a submission hold or something where the heel has him, and he's signaling to the crowd, like, and the crowd knows to cheer him on or her on, to get up and fight out of it, and that affects the character. So the audience is actually an active participant in the illusion of the match, and they're completely aware of it, and we'll get to very interesting kinds of interactions that happen as a result. But as a viewer, you actually pay to go and participate in the illusion. Because when a crowd doesn't participate, it's actually very noticeable. During the pandemic, wrestling was felt very different because you couldn't have the audiences. So you had few wrestlers and in an empty building. And it felt very, very different. So you sort of, the audience is very much a part of the presentation of wrestling. And if you're watching wrestling live, then you're both experiencing the audience and are part of it. So okay, we'll get into the audience a bit more in a bit, but in terms of character, because I think it's going to be useful to have this in the background. So again, this is a very archetypal art form. You have the good guy, the bad guy, the judge, and it's very rare that it's like gray area for the specific match. So the complexity of characters could come from their history, because characters may sometimes change alignment. It's called a turn, from face to heel, from heel to face. Often that happens organically based on, okay, the crowd is actually taking to him, or the crowd is not connecting. And we're going to need to do something about that. And usually there's a classic trope in wrestling where they say the best character is the person turned to 11, the knob turned all the way up.
Right.
And the way I think of that is the best characters are self-archetypifications. So you find an aspect of yourself as the performer, because most wrestlers are not trained actors. I happen to be, because trained. I did in high school, again, the same way you are, but that's something. Most people don't even have that, but the way they put things together and to make it convincing, they find an aspect of themselves and amplify it. And usually the characters, because of that, are going to be archetypal in the sense that you could probably describe them in a sentence as like what the character is. It's not going to be too, you're not going to need a whole paragraph or stuff like that to actually explain what the character is. You sort of get it from the moment you see it. So, and often what happens, which is interesting, because there's a big thing with authenticity in wrestling, which we might get to when we talk about the crowd, but very often characters, especially characters that are meant to be like the main guy in the meta narrative of the organization. Oh, I forgot to say. So you have matches, and usually you have non-match segments in a show. Those would be interviews. Those would be verbal disputes, sometimes brawls, where you sort of advance the meta narrative that underlines some matches. So you might build to something like this guy and this guy. Eventually, they're going to face, and that's going to be we're building it up because they actually have some tension between them that we went through ahead of time. So and you have the champion, you have other people that want to be the champion. And so characters that the booker is the person in charge of putting together the meta narrative of the organization, where each match is a narrative that is usually put together by either the wrestlers or the wrestlers with called a producer. So you have the matches within a larger organization. The organization has long-term storyline plans, and they put together what the matches would be and what the non-match segments would be in each show. So if you have someone that I want this guy I want to build my meta narrative around this guy or girl, then you start pushing them, you start showcasing them more, and often, and usually you want that guy to be a babyface because you want the fans to be behind him. Sometimes it works though when the main guy is a heel. And often they fail because as faces initially because they're inauthentic, because they're trying to be like, oh, I'm going to be this goody two shoes guy or whatever, and there are different ways to create the babyface character, but often they try to go for the ultimate, like the Superman, the cookie cutter, in a sense, boring character, because sometimes you need that as your anchor. And so they start off, and it feels inauthentic. So the crowd turns on them, which we'll get to later, which is a fascinating thing. The crowd doesn't buy the narrative. The crowd rejects the narrative. So what they do is they become heels, and then they work better as heels. They're more free to be themselves and find what works for them. And then eventually adapt the heel persona once that gets over, is a term that means the audience buys into it or is engaged with the character or with the performance. So from being heels, they adapt their heel persona into a babyface, which I think is in many ways akin to shadow integration and becoming a more authentic self. So if maybe names that people heard about, Steve Austin went through this process. The Rock, Dwayne Johnson went through this process. He was heavily rejected initially, and then found his character, which he also then took to Hollywood. Through being a heel. CM Punk, which is the guy who did the in the video you did about kayfabe, that's the guy with the microphone that got cut off. And so there, it's a very common thing where you really find yourself as a performer through actually being a heel after being a face doesn't really work out. So ideally, the characters would go through a meta narrative, like a long-term narrative of how their matches go and how the
They go through a
characters.
narrative arc.
Yeah. So ideally they go through narrative arcs. Now, because wrestling is actually, it's a distributed art form in the sense that it's very bottom up, and you're dependent on performers, and it's long term and it's real time. So things change in people's lives, they get injured and stuff like that. It's often you don't quite close. You might have a plan as a booker, but you don't quite get to close the arc, and also the character has to continue afterwards. So
Yes.
once you close a narrative arc, it's okay. So finish this story, but now you're still there. Still have to find something to do. And as far as like wrestling having a very distributed sense and it's very localized. You also have the main organizations like WWE, and recently in recent years have AEW, but you have the global tone setter in a sense, but it's still very, very, very localized. And you have an independent scene that is developing its own style and in different parts of the world, because wrestling started in the United States, but it spread very quickly to throughout the globe. And you have different local styles, because what works here isn't going to necessarily work in a different country. But then also, because it's international, you have wrestlers flying over the place. So you have the increasingly localized versions of the universal of what wrestling is, but then they also interact. So you have a British wrestler meet a Japanese wrestler, and they have different styles, and that interaction is also interesting in its own sense. So in terms of, okay, actually, before I move forward, do you have any questions that sort of, because I
I'm
said a
just
lot there.
fascinated by this whole thing. This, you watch something and you just sort of see it, and it's theatrical. But I mean, what you've just done is really cool in that you've just sort of laid it down. But I'm also curious. I mean, who knows why kids like what they like? I came home one day from first grade and I told my mother, I want to play the violin. And my mother looked at me like she obviously didn't know that the Suzuki thing was going to happen in school. And then I start playing the violin. The kid comes home one day and, my sons, I want to play basketball. Okay, well, I've been seeing basketball on TV. The Sacramento Kings were good for a little while. And you can, of course, sort of understand, how the heck did you decide you wanted to do theatrical wrestling? Were you watching wrestling on TV?
So I only started when it was a fad in
Okay.
the end, towards the
So it
end
was
of
a
elementary
fad. It was
school.
something that sort of rolled through the culture. And
Yeah,
there was
yeah.
a place that you could start. And now I've got a much better sense after you've described sort of the evolution. So your character evolves with you as, I mean, everybody, I would imagine, especially as kids, middle school, you're just trying stuff out. And then with an audience and people watching, this sort of works. And then things sort of evolve. It emerges collectively from everyone sort of watching and talking and signaling. And, there's just sort of a whoosh that happens and suddenly something exists. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So I'm honestly, I'm not sure exactly what I found so engrossing back then. I know now what I find in it now. I'm not sure to what extent this was the reason that I started. But yeah, I'm honestly, I'm not exactly sure what it was.
Because when I was in, let's say I was about 16. I was working cleaning up a bakery, and the other kid that cleaned up the bakery with me he was watching wrestling on TV, and he was talking about wrestling. So I'm a 16-year-old kid, so I'll take a look at it. So I watched some of it too, and it was kind of fascinating to me. Andre the Giant would come through, and I lived outside of New York, so it was probably, in terms of status in the United States, it was fairly large. I saw the videos that talked about how wrestling sort of, along with everything else with networks, sort of becomes globalized. But so I watched it on TV, and it was fascinating watching it as a kid. But as a kid, you sort of watch it innocently in that sense, in that you're just watching it and you're just enjoying it. And I think at that point, Ed McMahon was it not Ed McMahon, but
Vince.
Yeah, he was a wrestler then. He was like part of a tag team wrestling group, I think, and because this was back in the 70s. Okay.
Oh, so that's before the time I might be even, be able to sort of pinpoint. And
that's before the WWF. This was back in the 70s, and I was watching it on TV, and it was on one of the smaller New York channels. It wasn't on the network channel, and it was on a weird time of night. So if you wanted to watch it, you had to really watch it. There was no VHS to watch anything. And so, you just watch it, and then you talk to your buddy about it, and he knew more about it than I did. So we talked about it, but it was just kind of a thing you did as a kid, a thing that you watched. And then, you fart around with stuff too, but you don't want to hurt each other. And so you actually had a chance to, instead of, let's say, if all I'd been able to do was watch basketball on TV and I didn't actually have a hoop and a ball, you actually got a chance to start playing around with this stuff and participating, which is just fascinating. And especially in Israel. I'm not saying Israel is at the ends of the world, but it's not New York City. So
and the scene here is very small, and I was very fascinated. And again, I couldn't tell you why, but I was very fascinated with it, and to the extent that I really had to seek it out. Like I really had to seek it. It wasn't like, oh, maybe I'll try doing it, and I'll go to the local gym or whatever. Like I had to find the one place in Israel that does it. And
there wasn't a school program in this like there was in the drama club at school.
No, absolutely not. So whatever it was, I really wanted to do it.
And obviously you liked it enough and you were good enough at it that you stuck with it, even while you're sort of, so on one hand, boy, this is just so fascinating to me, because one of the other things I did, whoops, what did I do?
The camera.
What's going on?
See a picture with a much smaller beard now. Okay, there.
All right. So one of the other things I did is I played Dungeons and Dragons in high school. And that's a little closer to it in that I always played with my buddies, and we always play the same character because, we might play every weekend or every other weekend whenever we find the time. And, I always play this role and my buddies always play these roles. And one of our friends is the dungeon master. And so, but we're not, in a sense, LARPing with our D&D characters. And this was also very early days of Dungeons and Dragons. The books were just out now, and then within a couple of years, and there were all these stories about people taking it too far and getting hurt, and this is dangerous, and this is unchristian, and yada, yada, yada. So it went through the whole migration of that too. But the sense that when I did something in the drama club in school, I played this part, might take two months or so with all the practicing and everything, and then you play the role on stage for a couple of weekends, and then you're done. You go back to normal life. You're on one hand sort of developing this persona in this alternate universe, this wrestling universe, while at the same time you're a regular person and you're getting education and you're falling in love, and so you've sort of got these two worlds going side by side.
Yep. Yep.
That's fascinating.
And they were really separate worlds, because I didn't have my local friends from school were not into wrestling at all. I found one friend who was sort of a bit into it, but really it was a whole separate world that I wanted to have a which integrated, but it didn't. So I had my wrestling friends and I had my school friends.
And it's almost a superhero secret identity, isn't it? It's like in The Incredibles when, they're no longer allowed to go out there and be supers anymore, but they keep their suit, and, Mr. Incredible and his Frozone go out on weekends to stop crime. I mean, it's got to kind of be a little bit like that. I mean, although it isn't, but it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it has that aspect to it. Although it took me a few years to actually find a character that wasn't just that wasn't very generic and like coming out with my own name and stuff.
Right.
But it was still, even then it was still, I get to play a person who's really good at fighting.
Yeah.
Which even that aspect of it was very far from reality at the time. Yeah.
This is fascinating. I mean, you sent me a message. It's like, oh God, how am I going to fit this guy in? Let's fit it in, see what happens. And this is fascinating.
Okay, I'm glad it's working out. Because I like when I sent the message, I said, okay, he might find this very interesting, or it might not interest him at all. And like I didn't know where it would go and whether this would be a conversation that you or anyone would find productive. I do think, and we'll get to it actually, how, because when I sent a message, I wasn't sure how this relates to where we are as society right now in the meme crisis.
This relates to everything we talk about in this little corner. This is so germane.
Yeah, that was my feeling as well. But I wasn't exactly sure how, and I think now I have at least like a proposition that I'll give you at the end of this, which I think now would be a good time to sort of talk about how crowds are involved in wrestling a bit more, because this is a narrative. When you go to a movie, you can't yell at the movie that you dislike the movie, but you can in wrestling, because you're part of the movie, part of the narrative in wrestling, both for the match itself. So you are part of the narrative. The narrative of the match would be the crowd cheered him on, and he managed to use that energy to fight off his opponent, and you're part of that crowd. And so there's a very unique agent arena relationship in wrestling, because you're an observer to an extent, you're also a participant to an extent, and it's a very blurred line that you're in there. Because you're also,
I totally get that. This is just fascinating.
I'm really glad that that's
no, because I can very much imagine. So, and this isn't disconnected from preaching, because preachers are, to one degree or another, also performers. And so now I preach, in the style of our church is basically European, but I've got a lot of African Americans, and so the line between African American preaching is much more participatory. And in that, I don't know how much you know that, it's amen, it's preach it, it's, I mean, the crowd and the preacher in the African American church.
Can I get an amen?
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's very, in an African American church, the preaching is very much a dance together. And I would imagine that, especially with multiple matches going on in terms of character development, everyone is participating, the crowd, the wrestlers, the book, everyone is participating in just watching the collective emerge. And on one hand, there are scripts, but the scripts are constantly subject to, the scripts have to adapt to that. There's a broader collective reality that the scripts must adapt to. Otherwise,
Yes.
you're going to destroy it.
Exactly, and for that reason, usually the scripts in wrestling are going to be very broad strokes, in that we want to do this kind of thing after this kind of thing, but we're not sure exactly how it's going to fit in, and that would very much depend on the crowd interaction and how they're participating and what they're bringing to the table, and your interaction as a wrestler with the crowd, both as a face and as a heel, and with each other. There's a lot of, it's a dance that everyone is
Yes.
involved with, and actually, the preaching is very similar to what we in wrestling would call a promo. Promo is just live mic time where the wrestler speaks, and the more charismatic wrestlers, or they're called good promos, it's very much like a preaching thing. So if you were to look at right now, there's someone who's really picking up steam in WWE, called LA Knight, Knight with a K. It's a corny play of words.
Yep.
But you see him and just controlling the crowd and getting them to participate in what he's doing, and he's really, like sweeping them along, and it looks very much like a sermon in the African American type church that you talked about.
Oh, yeah.
You get that a lot. The equivalent of "Can I get an amen?" and then everyone participates. There's a lot of, like, the catchphrases of the wrestlers, and then you participate with the catchphrases, and and that you're involved in the promo as well, because so there's involvement in the match, and then the promo is you're participating in chanting, but it's also creating. So you have the local crowd, and if it's filmed, if it's WWE, if it's a high level production, then you also have the viewing audience at home, and the crowd is very much part of the product, part of the show, part of what you're consuming. And seeing this guy leading these people in a chant, that tells you something about him as a character, what kind of person he is, and all. So there's it's putting oneself as oneself. So I'm not, if I'm in the crowd, I'm not playing a character. I'm me, but I am participating in the illusion that I paid to watch.
Yes.
I am I paid to participate in enhancing and augmenting this illusion, this illusion of a fight, this fake narrative. And again, you had a lot of problem with the word fake and illusion and stuff like that when you watch the video at the time, and I understand why, because there is something it sounds deriding,
right,
when you use the word fake, and it's not.
right.
It's just the and there isn't a good word, because
There isn't a good word.
As I was watching, I watched the video again today in preparation, and just I couldn't find a good word that doesn't sound like if something is not real in a specific sense, we deride it as a culture.
Right.
And yeah, so you're participating in the, let's say, play. Okay, and the playing also in the sense of like playing a game, because it's in
the
the
way Vervaeke
playing.
talks about play.
Yeah, exactly. So it's you're playing along with what is happening, and there's also a sense where the audience is its own. So you talked about Michael Levin, its own agent as a whole, through distributed cognition, through all these different people coming together and being a crowd, and you're doing the chants together in unison. And as that viewing agent, you have a lot of power over what's happening, especially, and the most fascinating cases to me are the cases where there's conflict between the booker's vision and the vision of the audience. When the booker's vision does not land, as in the viewing public, there's something there if it's inauthentic. So that's what happened. And when the crowd started to boo a babyface, someone who was, what happened to The Rock, happened to the current top guys called Roman Reigns in WWE. And there were years where the crowd was actively fighting the booker and rejecting Roman Reigns. But, and this is incredible to me, they weren't doing it by going away. They did it by participating badly, in a sense. So they still participated. They did their yays and their boos. They just did it to the wrong people. They had the characters and we said, we want you to be a bad guy, essentially. For years, they said they booed Roman. They refused to accept Roman Reigns because they wanted him to be a bad guy. And sometimes there's also a blurring of the lines because you're self-participating and the character is very much attached to the person playing it, where in the forums and in the communities and stuff like that, people got confused and oh no, I actually hate him because he is a bad wrestler. He's bad at what he does, and they're pushing him down our throat. This also happened to John Cena way back when he was the top guy. There was a portion of the audience that rejected him in the same way by participating, but treating him as if he was the bad guy in his matches. And there's actually a video, I can send you a link afterwards, that a YouTuber called Super Eye Patch Wolf put out last week, I think. So the timing is impeccable, about Roman Reigns' journey and where he is right now and sort of what happened there with him, which I think is fascinating as a phenomenon of the crowd participating and actually affecting the character. So he's now a heel, finally, after years. And that heel character is very much related to the things that he has been through, being rejected for years and years and years by the audience. So the audience is very much part of the show in that sense. And it's again, I said earlier, when you go to a movie, you can't say I don't like this plot twist. I don't, in a way that would have with the director hearing you.
Right.
Or with
the
actor.
movie's set. It's set.
Yes.
And this you really participate in. Now you don't get to, it's like school spirit. It's a spirit fun. It's the spirit, basically.
Yeah.
You don't, even the principal doesn't really control school spirit. The principal has all of this stuff to try and create the school spirit that the principal wants. And the book is in that sense, sort of the same thing. But you don't control this. Because if it ain't right, you push this the wrong way, the crowd is going to make the book pay.
Yes, the booker. Yeah,
Booker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow,
that's
this is fascinating. Oh wow. I had no idea about this. This is incredible.
And again, just as a caveat, this is my own analysis. So the structure of the match. That's true. Everyone will tell you this is, every wrestler will tell you this is how a classic match is structured.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is sort of my own interpretation and analysis over the years, having been doing it, of what wrestling. So just as a caveat, this is me bringing my own,
Well, I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. I'm eating this up with a spoon. This is really good. This is super helpful on many levels, because part of the difficulty, because Vervaeke and Peugeot and I have been trying to talk about these things, and it's not easy to talk about, but part of what you're showing is that even though we're sort of stumbling around with language and we're using this cognitive science language and this religious language to get at it, but if you look at what you're showing is that if you look at theatrical wrestling, it's all operating. And because of the peculiars of it, this operates in lots of other things in life too. It operates in church, it operates in school, it operates in politics, it operates in almost everything that has a deep collective element to it.
Yeah.
But because this is just a very particular thing that we all have, at least some of us, and again, I watched this as a high schooler, So I have a sense of it. And I haven't really paid that much attention to it over time because I'm just busy with other things. But every now and then, and then when Peterson brought in the that one documentary, I watched that documentary, which was
What about Bret
fascinating.
Hart?
Yeah, that was
Yep.
fascinating. And then the kayfabe stuff from
Weinstein.
Weinstein grabbed my interest, and then those videos grabbed my interest. But you just laying it out here for me is like a revelation. It is super cool.
That's really
Mission
awesome
accomplished, man. Mission accomplished. You biggest colonizing randos conversation of a long time for me. Because I can see it. I can see it, and I have a sense of it, and I can draw connect. I mean, understanding is being able to draw connections between all sorts of other disparate things of your life. And because I live with this in church, and I also, so lately we started this whole membership thing, and this has brought drama into my life over the last couple of, I'm earning the $1,000 that YouTube is giving me just to try to keep the community, because you can just watch the community do this. And again, as a pastor, I'm used to dealing with communities in this way, who to listen to, and you don't even know exactly what you're doing. It's just experience. And I'm sure with wrestling, it's exactly the same thing. And so you've got the referee and you've got your opponent, and I mean, you had all the language for it. There's these spots, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and there's sort of the structure of the match, but the crowd is involved, and everyone will leave the building, even though in some ways it's sort of set how it's going to end, but in other ways, every time you do it, there will be surprises, and nobody's in control of the overall arc of the entire drama. So,
yes, and usually when historically, I think when people try to overly control, you can sense it. You can sense that there's something there that isn't harmonic to what is happening, to the moment. I'm trying to create this thing artificially, as opposed to I can try it, but if it fails, I have to acknowledge that it failed. And pivot, because otherwise the collective is going to rise up and reject what it is that I'm offering.
Yeah. Did you see Inception?
Yes.
There's these places in the movie when they're in a dream, and I think it was the one character who's now trans. I forget.
Elliot.
That one. I forget the name, and I don't want to send attention over there. But the person in the dream, the architect of this dream, starts like folding things up and moving things around. And then there's the crowd in the dream that then starts to turn on the architect who's within the dream. And the Leonardo DiCaprio character is like, don't mess too much with this, because they will turn on you. And of course, there's this one sequence early on where there's this raging mob trying to get at someone. And that's because they've messed with the dream so much. And that's in a sense, what you're dealing with here, that the crowd has a mind and a life of their own. And so you've got to work with the crowd. It's the same with a congregation. You've got to work with a congregation. You've got pastors that are just like this, and they kill their church because, they haven't listened to anyone. They haven't led. They've just been a tyrant, and it doesn't work.
And by the way, that's a lot. So we talked about, or the video that you mentioned in the other video about kayfabe, mentioned how Trump was involved in wrestling a lot. Trump is very much in tune with that. He knows how he stands in a room, and he preaches, in a sense. There is a very big aspect of participation with and from the audience he's talking to, and then the viewer can see that. So he's and resonate with that, and that's why he got this perception of him as a man of the people, because you can see he's really good at that.
And you can tell, I mean, because when he, even when he started his campaign for the 2016 election, he decided to do big rallies. That was his campaign method. And it, when he did that, I thought that makes perfect sense, because this is a stage that really works for him. And in many ways, it was very similar to, let's say, a WW, a worldwide wrestling thing. And I also remembered, you see this sometimes with the John McCain campaign. There was someone who got a little out of hand, a woman who starts yelling at him, and you could just tell. And there was recently with Vivek, the other campaign, there's another video that went viral. And you just watch how these different candidates have to learn how to deal with a mob. They have to learn how to deal with a crowd. And there are different ways to deal with a mob. I mean, obviously, you can bring in the riot police and just squash it. And sometimes that's appropriate. Other times you can deal with a mob that you can sort of, it's really dangerous thing to try, but you can sort of, if you've got enough skill and you have the right platform, you can redirect and take that energy and move it into a different way. And I would imagine, in terms of this stage and all of the elements that wrestling has, all of the different characters, I mean, again, it's just so complex, but those are the things you want to do. And I would imagine the really successful wrestlers are those who can, make this thing go in satisfying directions, let's say.
Yes, getting a hostile crowd. The mark of a good promo person. Promos in this case would be the person, someone who's good at promos, is being able to turn a hostile crowd. And I think the underlying thing is understanding why the crowd is reacting the way they are reacting.
Yes.
What is it that is missing that makes it so that I'm not getting the desired response?
Right. And it's even, you sort of know what the desired responses are. You know what positive and negative is. Sometimes a negative response is a positive, especially if you're a heel, I would imagine, because
yeah, absolutely. You're trying to get booed.
Right. And but everybody knows that in this sense, getting booed is a good thing.
Yes.
And yet they're all playing along with it.
Yes. Yeah, the best thing you can do to a heel, if you appreciate them, is boo the living hell out of them. That is absolutely, like, if I appreciate the work you're doing as a heel, I am going to boo you relentlessly.
Right. I'm going to love to hate you, and you're going to love that I hate you the way I do.
Yes.
But within limits, okay? I don't want anybody stalking my house or taking pot shots at me on the freeway. None of that.
So I do that within the confines of the arena where it's relevant.
Right. There you have the arenic relationship there.
Yes.
That, afterwards, I might really want your autograph because you're my favorite heel. But within the arena, I'm going to stand up and be ugly and make signs and boo and all of those things.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's so fascinating.
Historically, there was... So people sometimes think that the fans thought wrestling was real for a long time, and that's why it succeeded. It's actually not the case. Very early on, as early as... So there's a quote I have here from the 1930s of... one second. The fans would say, so this is from an article in the New Yorker from 1931. Who cares if an audience member was quoted saying, "Who cares if they're fixed or not? The show is good." So at that time already, it was like an open secret. Now, it was very important to keep the facade or the mirage going to allow the audience to their immersion.
Right.
And I think there was a point in the video that you looked at last time that I think was off the mark in an important way for where we are right now. Because I don't think the literal truthfulness was ever important to any of this. And the CM Punk shoot promo, so again, shoot would be... a kayfabe is fake. In Carney speak, that would be parts of the illusion,
right,
that are, intentional,
right.
And a breaking kayfabe or shooting would be doing something that is actually not part of the act, not part of the play. And the worked shoot, which is doing something that looks like it's not part of the play, but actually is part of the play.
Right.
CM Punk was the focal point of the video that you mentioned. He did this thing in July 2011, June or July, and he took a microphone, and it looked like it wasn't part of the show. It looked like he was saying, "No, none of this is real." Like that's the feeling you get by watching the video. None of this is real. This is fake. And actually, the people in charge, he never actually did that. He said things that were true that many fans thought about the backstage, but he did it within the confines of kayfabe.
Yes.
He did it within the confines of the show. He actually brought reality into kayfabe. He didn't say, "Okay, this is a show. Now we're going to talk about something that is outside of the show." And if you watch it back, there's the actual things that he said, they were at the time they were revolutionary because there were things that were not allowed to be said live on air in WWE. It's not because he told you that this is a facade. There is a way to look at what he's saying and his sour grapes with the fans and with the office and all that stuff in a way that fits perfectly as a character saying something.
Yes.
And there is something in wrestling right now, especially so we have WWE and you have AEW, which is the upcoming promotion, where I think they're really missing the point. I think it also relates to a lot of what's happening right now culturally. A lot of people think that they liked it because, that was actually reality. Like reality TV is reality.
Right. Reality TV. Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. But it's just, to the extent that I think reality TV took off, I don't think it actually had to do a lot with the novelty of, this is actually meant to be real, but more that it happened, the narratives, while simple, happened to be engrossing.
Yes.
And nowadays you can see there's a tacit rejection. Many fans think that they like the meta stuff, but actually when you present a good narrative, that's the best thing that they get. So CM Punk right now is in AEW, in the other promotion, because he did have a lot of enemies in the WWE, and it ended badly, and now he's in this competing promotion. And that promotion does a lot of stuff where it's like with a wink and a nod, and is this real? Is this not? And universally, the most loved storyline of, I think it was last year, was this character there are two people who drew the most ratings by looking at the quarter hours of their weekly show. CM Punk is one of them. It's because he's a huge star. MJF, Maxwell Jacob Friedman, is another. And the thing about the novelty of MJF is that he is acting like wrestlers used to act. So he never breaks kayfabe. He is in character on Twitter as well. You never see behind the curtain with MJF. And so you get to be engrossed in this character, and it's a character, but he is always playing that character, and the character is an absolute prick. So in signings and stuff like that, people pay him pay money to go see him, and him giving them the middle finger and yelling at them and stuff like that.
So is Andrew Tate in wrestling?
No,
I know he isn't, but is he?
Could be. Yeah.
Because you look and you think, now he's never in a ring, but this is where this whole dynamic is incredible, because in some ways social media has allowed the participation for many people in very analogous ways.
I agree. So the most, with all the meta stuff and stuff like that, the most riveting part of AEW television was simply CM Punk the babyface, MJF the heel, just telling a good narrative for a few months. And that was better than anything else. And it's also happening now in WWE. So Vince McMahon was for many years considered by many to be out of touch. He now stepped down. his son-in-law, who was mentioned in the video, is now the executive in charge of creative. He is much more in touch with what modern audiences want. The shows are no longer meta. People are just really, really enjoying them. And actually, wrestling now is in a relative boom period that it hasn't had since the late 90s, where it was a cultural phenomenon. It's the #1 rated show in most weeks, all shows, and there's a lot of hours of wrestling a week. You'd be surprised by how many hours of wrestling there are live on TV every single week.
I would be, because I don't watch any of them, partly because we no longer have sort of limited collective channels. So where do people watch wrestling now? Are there like dedicated streaming networks for it?
No, the USA Network, TBS, TNT, Fox now has the highest rated show, right, in terms of viewing audience. And also, it's when you don't have major things happening in the news or sports, wrestling is consistently the most viewed show on cable and network television every week. If you look at the charts, they're always the top shows. And I think it's now because people, essentially what people want is just a compelling narrative that they can follow or be a part of. I don't think they want, you only ever try to look behind the curtain when the play is boring, essentially.
Exactly.
And I think that's true for, where we are right now. People just really are looking for a narrative they can embody in a way that is, engaging them correctly, that feels harmonious, that works. Yeah. So
wow. It's funny because I haven't given wrestling a lot of attention. I mean, Peterson kind of pointed to it, and the kayfabe thing, I did a little bit with it, but it wasn't really until you kind of laid this out for me that I really saw this. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to get, about the only television I watch is when I watch with my wife, and I don't think she's going to go for the wrestling, but but I'm intrigued now, and this is fascinating.
And there's one more thing also, which is more related to a previous point, but there's a way that wrestling is extremely universal because it's as a narrative form. It's so you said in the other video, narrative is about compression. I think it's the most compressed form of narrative that I know of, in the sense that you have the good guy, you have the bad guy, they're fighting. It's pre-linguistic struggle. It's pre-linguistic narrative. It's pre-linguistic overcoming of adversity. It's very primal in that sense, and it's very universal. And I think there's a lot of, I think part of the problem we're facing now is that there is a conflation of simple with bad or stupid or unsophisticated. And actually, I think wrestling, when it's done correctly, when it's booked correctly, is extremely sophisticated because of its simplicity. And I think as we need to introduce that a bit more as a culture, the West in general, a bit more like back to basics in that sense of things don't have to be complicated. They just have to be a compelling narrative.
Right. And what's so sophisticated, and yet I think you said it very, very well. I think it's what's so sophisticated because of its simplicity is that nobody, you don't just, and this is of course what Hollywood is banging into, because all of this stuff about the modern, the postmodern, the metamodern, I mean, this is all connected and related to this here. People want a compelling narrative. Okay, well, if Hollywood could figure out how to sit down and write a compelling narrative every time, if they could turn it into a deliverable drug, they would, have us all addicted. But you can't. And that's exactly what wrestling sort of demonstrates with the crowd, because is this going to be, because every now like something comes out and you'd like, I wouldn't think that would have been a compelling narrative, but there it is. And it
Yes.
is compelling and it surprises
Yes.
me.
Yes.
And oh, this is fascinating. This is so fascinating. This blows my mind, but I can see it. And it's true. It's right there.
Yeah. And there's also this is probably my the final point. It's not really related to anything in particular, but there's when you go to a show, there's anywhere between 5 and 8 matches, and each one of them is its own individual narrative, and usually you want them to be different enough in the way they tell essentially the same narrative structure, to where there's the crowd is both participating in different ways and taking from it different things. And that was there was a sentence Peterson said in the conversation with Pajot about how you have the narrative, and then the level beyond that is being a person who can embody this narrative. And the way to do that is being exposed to the narrative of down and up, of stable, disintegration, reintegration many different times. And I think wrestling actually does that very, very, very well.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Because like you said, generally speaking, the story structure is very simple. It's a simple story structure.
Yes.
But there are innumerable ways that you embody that simple story structure. And
Yes.
we never tire of that simple story structure.
We haven't for thousands of years.
Even though, and so if you look at, so the video I just made about Mrs. Davis, when I looked at Thomas Flight's modern, meta-modern video, when you look at a movie like High Noon, everybody knows Gary Cooper is going to win, but you don't know how. It's the same simple story structure, but the passion, the excitement, the beauty of it is in how exactly the simple story structure is achieved.
Yep, exactly.
Wow.
But you don't need anything beyond the simple structure.
No.
With
and it's two guys in the ring plus the ref who has a part to play, but it's not about the ref.
The ref, in a sense, is in a sense, I think the ref is God or reality, like trying to cheat, because the ref has a part to play of the neutral observer, the arbiter, and then to the extent that cheating happens is when you try to,
right.
to put one over on.
And of course, again, I watched wrestling in the 70s coming out of New York. And of course, the chair comes in and you hit the guy with the chair. And, the one guy in the tag team is distracting the ref and the other guy, takes a chair and something. And, I mean, as a kid, I just watched this stuff and it's like, and you're just, there's enough dissonance in there. You're just fascinated by it. And you don't even know why you're fascinated. You're just a kid watching it. You're just fascinated. You talk to your friends about it.
Yep. And by the way, tag team wrestling, so it goes through the exact same narrative, just in a slightly different way.
Right.
You have the faces succeeding, then the heels sort of team up to get one of the guys down. And instead of the comeback, you have the hot tag. So he's the same guys in peril, two guys teaming up on him, and eventually manages to tag his partner in, and that's sort of the plays the same role in the narrative.
Right. And you can reset the narrative, and there's all these themes and variations, and you can keep it interesting that way. And I'm so glad I said yes to this. I am so glad I said yes to this. I'm so glad you
I
wrote
sent the message. Yeah.
I'm just blown away. This was so cool. This was so cool. This was so helpful to me. Just helping me see and understand a lot more stuff than obviously just beyond wrestling, but seeing this collective cognition, this collective agency, this collective participation, because it's all just sort of there. And now I'm really going to have to. Now I don't know what my wife is going to say. Say, honey, I'm going to go to a pro wrestling event. She's going to look at me and I say, you can come too. She's going to be like, this is like a lot of the crazy stuff you do. I'll stay home. Thanks. You go. Maybe take your friend Rick with you. Rick will go with me. So
Yeah, and it's fascinating, I think, to see as an outsider. Yeah, it's and also we'll probably talk more after this. I can send you videos. I can send you
yeah, definitely
recommendations
send me video. Send me some stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Well, Guy,
Uh,
this was just outstanding. And I go on vacation next week, so and my channel's going to be quiet, but you can keep sending me stuff because it just lives there. And I
yep.
can always check. And I'm super interested in it now. So yeah, send me anything you think that might be helpful for me sort of understanding. And because I don't know anything. I mean, I remember
Hmm.
Andre the Giant, and if I remember the big face of, I don't even remember his name, but I remember he was just like you described. He was the top guy, and however wrestling was structured when I was watching, say, wrestling out of New York City back in the 70s. So
Maybe it was Bruno Sammartino.
no,
No, okay.
name sounds familiar, but it wasn't him. And it was a classic face. I mean, he was a good guy, and but then of course Andre the Giant was always lurking out there. Nobody can beat Andre the Giant. Andre the Giant was just sort of this, this whole other thing in the whole scene. There was a really nice documentary I watched recently on Andre the Giant, which was really rather moving. Interesting guy, but
Yeah.
also this whole sense of, again, I played characters on a stage in high school. I'm a pastor. There's a performative aspect of being a pastor in a church. There are times when I'm a father, there's times when I'm a pastor, but this was fascinating. This just fascinates me. So you win colonizer of the year. You just sort of swept my legs out from under me in this conversation and sort of taught me a whole new thing. So thank you. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear. So just before we wrap it up, just a few things I would
Yeah,
like
plug whatever
to,
you want. You
yeah.
earned it.
Um, so you can look me up on Twitter, follow me there. I'm about to launch a podcast with a couple of my friends who are also in this little corner.
Really?
Um, yeah, yeah. So we'll see sort of exactly what it is that we do. We're in this little corner plus theories of everything, Kurt J. Mongol, if you
Yeah.
know who that
Yeah.
is. So that's our thing, and we just like to have good conversations. We really enjoy talking to one another. So we're going to do that. And also there's the Hebrew course that I'll also link in the description that I'm launching now. It might be up by the time the video is up. If not, there will be a link there to get notified when it is available. And yeah, so just follow me, and there are also Instagram. My Instagram is my wrestling character. It's just a wrestling Instagram. Now it's new. I need to put stuff in there.
What's your wrestling character name?
Lenny Levi. Lenny Lenny, Levi. And it's a stereotypical nerd.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll upload. I'll try to be good about uploading stuff because I recently opened it, and it's
Well, I'm not on
not
Instagram, but
great
you might
on
get me
social
there.
media.
And this conversation, I mean, there's all this drama right now about the member levels, but this conversation is exactly the kind of conversation I put in the member section, because
Hmm.
what I've learned with YouTube is if you want people to, I put out way too much content already. That's true. If I was a better YouTuber, I would put out less content because it just takes time for people to absorb. One of the things you learn in performance is pacing is critical.
Yeah, yeah,
And with how I use
wrestling as
YouTube,
well.
I don't pace well, and I don't bother me because my goal isn't to have a channel of 100,000 subs. It's not my goal. But when I have a conversation like this, I so badly want to share it right away, but I can't because I got all these other things in the pipeline. So what I'm doing is
Hmm.
I'm setting up these different levels so I can get something out into the pipeline and I can talk about it a little bit with people before it goes out, before the pacing is right for the main stage. So,
So
but
you're
you
going,
understand that.
yeah, yeah. So you're going to like release it earlier for members or exclusively for members?
So what I've done with my and this might go away within 6 months or a year or two, who knows, because I'm just playing with all this stuff.
Yep.
But I had like 3 levels of membership. So the first level of membership, the $3 level of membership, so it's super cheap. Basically, I'll throw videos in there early, because often what'll happen is I'll have a conversation like this and I'm so excited about it, I'll start to talk about it. And then people are like, well, when can I see it?
What are you talking about? Yeah.
You can't see it yet. Well, why don't you release it right away? Because it's not good for the channel if I release it right away. There's actually some kind of a sequence that I work on with my videos. So I want to release it right away. And I've done that in the past, but it actually doesn't help because I want people to see this video. So I have to release it within sequence. Otherwise, sort of the larger arc of my channel gets out of sequence. And it doesn't mean I necessarily always use chronology, but there is a sequence in my mind in terms of how I launch things. But I'm so impatient to do it. So what this little membership channel does is says, here's a place that I can dump a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And it doesn't hurt the larger channel because, there's only just a few dozen who are at that level. And there's thousands at the other level. So it's good to sort of have a little bit of, so here's a little inside view, and then people start to leave comments and they make suggestions. And then by the time
you get to scratch the itch of actually talking about it without it ruining your channel. Yeah.
And then also titling is super important with YouTube. To any performance, again, titling, just like the development of your character, your name, your persona. I mean, that's all critical. And so titles and thumbnails are super important for YouTube. And it actually takes me a while to think about a better title. And you can change titles on YouTube as it goes. You got to be careful with that. You don't want to do it too much. But so having sort of a waiting area where, say, a few dozen people can sort of see it and make comments helps me to sort of digest it and say, okay, here's a good title. Here's a presentation. Here's how I can talk about it. Otherwise, I'm just doing this alone. So.
Yeah, I completely understand in different ways. So for me, the titling of the course, by the way, is called Hiblio. Took a while to land on that. Me and my partner had a lot of conversations and sometimes often people think that it's just a name, but it's really not. There's a lot that goes into it.
So send me any links that you want with this. So yeah, promote the heck out of it. I don't care. You gave me gold. So
I'm really happy to hear that.
No, I am super excited about this conversation, and I so badly want to share it, but I know, so I'll probably share it sometime next week when I'm on vacation, which is going to be super frustrating for me, because now I also know that, if I put up a conversation with Jonathan Peugeot, boom, everybody watches it because it's Jonathan Peugeot. They're going to see your face. They're not going to know you're like, what's this about? And then wrestling, then a whole bunch of people who are sort of full of themselves. So, I don't want to talk about wrestling. Blah, 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 blah. But those who watch it, they're going to get they're going to get more than what they anticipated. So job well done, guy. Job well done.
Thank you.
And,
thank you. And
I'll warn you, just like with Raj and my local estuary, after I release this, there's going to be a whole bunch of people that want to talk to you and want you on their channels. It's coming. Just warning you. Choose wisely.
I'll prepare myself for that.
Okay. Good.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Oops. I must have a wire here that's under some tension. When I hit the table, it loses connection. So anyway, thank you so much. This was well worth it. And we will talk again. Go ahead and send me a bunch of links of stuff that would kind of get me up to speed on the wrestling world. Crazy.
All right. Yeah, I know exactly what to send you. Great. So we'll talk, we'll
talk again sometime, probably September or so, after I've got through vacation and all of that stuff. And I'm going to have to get up to speed on what you're talking about. And then we can talk further.
Yep. But I'll be in Japan at that point, but
okay.
We'll see what works.
We'll figure it out.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks a lot.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, this is Paul. I just got off the conversation with the guy, and I realized I misspoke with respect to the member levels of the channel. It's actually the second tier, the $7.99 tier. That's no wait, no ads. where this will appear a little earlier. But it's exactly like I told him. Pacing, if I were when you look at, say, someone like Jordan Peterson and his release of videos, he releases videos like every 3 days or so. That's actually, if you watch, this varies by the size of channel and what the channel does, et cetera, et cetera. That's actually sort of the right pacing for a channel like mine if I released videos about every 3 days. Now, some of you would be upset by that because you listen every day, and it's sort of like a radio program. And so the question is, well, what kind of a channel is this? And I continue to try to think about and work on what kind of a channel is this, because we don't know. We don't know what YouTube is. We don't know what these channels are. We don't know what we're doing. And so what we're doing is we're sort of discovering as we go. And so when I have a conversation like this, which was just another gold star conversation, Guy taught me so much, and I could see it when he told it. Now, there's a lot that happens when you see things like this. A lot of it's about timing. I might not have had the same reaction to a conversation like this a year ago because I didn't understand as much. And maybe a year from now, I'll see things a little bit differently. That's sort of how we grow and evolve. But so yeah, and so that's part of the reason that I have the tiers in this membership thing. And again, I know some people are worried that, oh, I'm not going to see, if I don't join, I'm not going to see. Now, for the most part, the vast majority of my material will be free, and everything that I want to be out there on the open internet, I'm going to get out there on the open internet. There are other things that shouldn't be on the open internet, and so I'm not going to put them on the open internet. And this one is going to be on the open internet, and probably most of you are watching it. But as I said before, sometimes I have a conversation like this that I'm so excited about, and what I start doing is start talking to people about it. And this often happens if I talk to Peugeot or Vervaeke or someone and say, oh yeah, I just talked to Jonathan Peugeot. At some point, I'll probably have a conversation with Jordan Peterson, and then I'll mention to people I talked to Jordan Peterson. When can I see it? I have to think about pacing, because I have to think about the sequence of the videos in terms of a larger narrative that perhaps only I have in my head about the larger narrative. And so that's why to let a few dozen people see it in the no wait, no ads level helps me, because then they leave comments, and their comments give me new thoughts. And by the time then that I title it and release it, it's sort of like in seeker churches changed preaching in some ways. One of the things that happened in seeker churches was, if you were, let's say, on staff at Willow Creek in the 90s or in the aughts, I don't know if they still do this, even sometimes Bill Hybels, you would preach your sermon in front of a group of people, instead, in other words, sort of a test audience, and they would give you feedback. And this is sort of what happens with Rough Draft for Sunday with me. I mean, I give you a little version of my sermon, and then people give feedback. And then based on that feedback, I can then alter it for the big audience. Now, in the cases of these interviews, I don't edit or alter them for the larger audience, but it helps me navigate and know the audience in many ways, similar to what Guy was talking about in terms of the audience as a participant in the much longer story arc that we are all participating in. So I had to correct that, misspeaking, because I didn't want anybody saying, "Ooh, I get videos early if I just join the in the door or the randos level of the tier." And no, that will have certain videos that I don't want on the open internet. The next level up, no ads, no wait, that's where I usually kind of park things for a few days until it's the right time to release it in terms of the scope and sequence of the videos. And usually when I release videos, often I release every day. Like, I'm heading towards my vacation, so I'm probably going to slow down the release so that I have some things that are released while I'm on vacation. Sometimes I just have so much content that I'm releasing 2 a day, which is, again, terrible for the algorithm, because there's not enough, my channel is too small to actually absorb all that content. And you hear many people say, oh, he didn't have time to, many people say, oh, I can't watch all your stuff. Of course you can't watch all my stuff. Now, maybe if it's in a rhythm like you always listen to me when you run or you listen to me when you drive to work or something like that, then you can absorb more stuff. But everybody's sort of in a different place. And so when I think about this channel and what I want to accomplish with this channel, I think about timing and pacing. And sometimes I have to fight myself because I'm so excited because I want to release a video like this right away, and I really shouldn't. And now I want to release this little video, which is coming at the end of this video, and maybe I'll release that to the one level. So, yeah, there it is.